The wind moved low through the millet fields, brushing soft over the worn stone path where the morning had barely taken hold. A quiet, uneven whimper, almost lost beneath the rustling stems, caught the ear of an old farmer walking with a bucket in hand. He stopped, tilted his head. The sound came again. Faint, fractured. Not the cry of a bird, not the cough of the breeze. He turned from the path, following the murmur through tall grass until his boots scraped against cracked stones half swallowed by soil and vines. There, a forgotten well, no more than a circle of moss-covered rock, its mouth hidden beneath shadow and time. He knelt beside it slowly, peering down. The silence returned. Then a breath, shallow and low, and a small, soft cry that barely climbed the distance. At the bottom, curled and unmoving, lay a puppy. Its fur, once white, was streaked with earth and stained by time spent without sun. One leg twitched, then stillness again. The farmer didn't speak at first. His breath caught in his throat as he leaned closer, trying to make sense of the distance, the depth. It was at least 20 feet, maybe more. The well had long dried. No water, only dust and a few scattered stones where the pup had landed. He rose slowly and walked back toward the village. Not rushed, but purposeful. A stillness hung over the fields, as if the land itself had heard the sound and now waited. Word spread without much noise. No alarms, no panic. Just a shared nod, a glance, a gesture of need. By the time the farmer returned, 3 others followed, one with a rope, one with a small basket, and one carrying a flask of water. They stood around the well in silence, eyes adjusting to the depth. The puppy hadn't moved again. Only the occasional tremble of its rib cage told them there was still life below. Still, breathing, one of the men murmured, almost to himself. The rope was tied with practiced hands, worn fingers working through habit. There was no urgency in their motion, only steadiness, as if haste might shatter the fragile thread of hope that hung between earth and sky. The sun had begun to climb now, casting a thin shaft of light into the well. Dust floated through the beam like drifting seeds, slowly descending. Down below, the pup remained curled, as if sleep had wrapped around it like bark around a root. Its chest rose and fell too lightly, too far apart. One paw twitched again. The villagers didn't speak further. They knew the next step would take care, patience, and someone willing to be lowered into the cold quiet below. And the countryside, in its gentle breath and swaying green, waited with them. The rope held firm between 2 fig trees whose roots had once cracked the ground open beside the well. They had stood through many seasons, flood, heat, dry wind, but today they bore a quieter weight. It was not just the rope. It was the eyes of the villagers, the breath they held, the hope they dared not speak aloud. A man named Rahim stepped forward. He was not young, but steady. A mason by trade, his hands were calloused and sure. Without ceremony, he tested the knots twice, then glanced into the well. He had seen injured goats lifted from crevices, children drawn from flash floods. But this was different. Smaller, frailer, a life barely begun, already losing its grip. He nodded once. No words. The others tightened the harness around his waist and shoulders. The bucket they had brought earlier, meant to lower supplies, now hung empty beside him. Its shape would soon cradle the puppy if they could reach it in time. The rope was slowly released, hand over hand, guided through palms browned by sun and work. Rahim's boots scraped the inner wall of the well as he descended, sending thin ribbons of dust down past his knees. Shadows gathered tighter as the light narrowed above him. From the surface, no one moved. A child sat beside her mother, her fingers wrapped around a sprig of wild basil. The air pressed down with a soft stillness, not heavy, just holding everything in place. Rahim's foot touched the bottom. The dirt was dry and packed, smelling of stone and time. He crouched beside the small shape. The puppy hadn't moved since earlier, but its chest still rose faintly. One eye fluttered open, then closed again. The body was thin, the limbs loose but not broken. He reached out slowly, as if approaching a bird's nest. His fingertips grazed the pup's side. Warm, fragile, still alive. From above, the rope creaked. A gentle sound, but it made one of the elders shift his weight. There was no urgency in Rahim's movements, only caution, precision. He wrapped the pup in a piece of cloth from his belt, worn soft by years of use. As he drew it close, the animal gave a soft, involuntary whimper. Not a cry, just a sound that barely touched the air. "Easy now," Rahim whispered. "You're almost there." The puppy's ear twitched, then settled. Its legs hung limply, but its body leaned into the fold of cloth. There was no resistance, only the quiet surrender of exhaustion. He placed the wrapped bundle into the bucket, tucking it carefully to one side. Then, with a nod upward that none could see, he tugged twice on the rope. The signal was understood. Hands at the top pulled together, careful not to sway or jar the lift. The bucket rose slowly, its bottom brushing the rough wall, sending small stones tumbling downward. Rahim watched until it vanished into the light above. He leaned his back against the wall, waiting for his own lift. The air was colder down here, still as a cave, but his breath was steady. Above ground, the villagers bent close as the bucket emerged. Inside, the puppy lay wrapped like a seed in soil. A woman touched the cloth lightly, her fingers barely grazing the fur. The puppy stirred once. One paw shifted, then stillness again. They carried the bundle away from the edge and laid it gently in the grass. The child's sprig of basil dropped from her hand as she stepped closer, watching with wide, unblinking eyes. Rahim surfaced not long after, dust streaking his shirt, hands raw from rope. He looked toward the pup, then lowered his gaze, breathing deeply. The rope, now slack, was coiled and set aside. No one said much, but for a moment the well stood quiet again. No sound rising from its depths, only the breath of wind curling through dry leaves and the faint rustle of cloth around a body still fighting to stay. Rahim stayed low as the bucket disappeared into the hands above, his back pressed to the well's cold stone wall. In the stillness that followed, the air settled like dust. He gave one last glance around the hollow space before tugging the rope twice. The signal. The harness grew taut, lifting him inch by inch through the vertical tunnel of stone. His legs braced against crumbling edges. His hands held tight. But his thoughts remained below, where life had barely clung to breath. By the time he reached the surface, the villagers had gathered quietly around the bundled cloth. The puppy lay curled on its side, wrapped in the faded blue fabric that now held the scent of earth and old sweat. Its fur was matted with grit and dried mud. Small flakes clung to its ears. One eye had opened, but just slightly, not in alarm, not in focus, only the faintest gesture that something inside still stirred. The body was limp, but not lifeless. Its ribs moved shallowly with gaps between breaths that made time slow. A twitch in the hind leg. Then stillness again. The villagers didn't speak. The men stood with hands clasped in front of them, while the women knelt beside the cloth, watching the rise and fall of breath like a prayer. Rahim stepped toward them slowly. His boots were caked with red dust from the climb, but his movements held the same patience as before. He crouched beside the cloth, reaching out to feel the pup's flank again. The skin was warm, but only barely. The body yielded beneath his hand, soft, weightless. He turned slightly and nodded toward the house nearest the well. Inside, someone had already prepared a bowl of water, shallow and clear. Another brought a second cloth, dampened and clean. They worked without words, guided by quiet agreement that passed from hand to hand. The child with the basil watched from the doorway, her eyes fixed on the slow rhythm of care. Rahim dipped the cloth and touched it gently to the puppy's mouth. At first, there was no response. The pup's lips stayed slack. Then a flicker, a faint movement of the tongue, barely there, as if memory stirred at the sensation of cool moisture. The eye opened again, a little wider this time. Unfocused, but present. The villagers remained still. The only sounds were the soft motions of cloth against fur, the occasional whisper of wind through the open window. A man handed Rahim a strip of old blanket, which he folded carefully and wrapped around the puppy's thin frame. Then, without lifting it, he slid the small bundle closer to the fire pit, where a few embers had been coaxed into warmth. "He's trying," someone said softly. The pup shifted again, one paw rising half an inch, then falling. Not strength, not purpose, just the faint echo of instinct pushing toward warmth, toward life. Its ears twitched at a sound only it could hear. Maybe the wind. Maybe a memory. Rahim sat beside it, one hand resting lightly on the curve of its back. He didn't stroke or pet. Just contact, steady, quiet, reassuring. The pup didn't flinch. It breathed again. Shallow, but present. As the sun reached its peak and the shadows retreated into corners, the cloth around the puppy began to rise with a more regular rhythm. The child knelt closer, now holding the basil sprig loosely between two fingers. She didn't reach out. She just watched. In the center of the quiet room, the smallest life held on, wrapped in layers of cloth, care, and the soft hush of people who had paused their day to become still for something that could not speak. The house had grown quieter with each passing day, not out of emptiness, but out of respect. People spoke less when they entered. Children paused at the doorway, watching with wide eyes but keeping their distance. Even the animals that passed through the yard, the goats, the hens, the small tan cat that lived between two neighboring homes, moved more gently when near the walls of Rahim's home. Something delicate had taken root there, and the village, in its quiet way, made room for it. The puppy had begun to show signs of returning strength. Its breaths no longer came in ragged, uncertain intervals. It moved more during sleep, shifting from one side to the other, tucking its paws closer to its belly, stretching out when the fire's warmth reached across the floor. In the early morning light, when the air was still and pale, Rahim would sometimes find it curled near the edge of the hearth, nose pressed to the floor, ears flicking at imagined sounds. The clothes used to wrap the puppy had been replaced with an old cotton shawl, worn soft from many years. Rahim folded it into a shallow nest, set just far enough from the fire to be warm but not harsh. He placed a bowl of water within reach, changed often, though the puppy only managed a few slow laps each day. It was progress. Small, but steady. Rahim didn't speak much to the animal, but he remained present. He would sit for long stretches with his back against the wall, watching the puppy sleep or wake, rise or stumble. His touch, when offered, was brief and careful. A steadying hand beneath the belly, a slow sweep across the back. The pup responded with tiny movements. A lean toward his palm, a softening of the shoulders. It wasn't affection, not in the human sense. It was permission. The air outside had turned crisp, signaling a change in the season. The millet stalks had already been cut, bundled, and hauled to storage. The fields lay open now, flat and golden. Trees that once held heavy green began to flicker with yellow and brown. The land exhaled, resting before the cold. It was during one of those late afternoons, when the sky glowed faintly orange and the sun sat low behind the trees, that the sound came. Quiet at first, like a breeze stirring the underbrush. Rahim might not have noticed if the puppy hadn't raised its head. Its ears turned toward the doorway, body tense. Then it made a soft, unsure sound in its throat, something between a whimper and a question. Rahim followed its gaze. He stepped to the edge of the doorframe, resting a hand against the wood. At first, there was nothing, just the slow waving of grass and the rustle of dry leaves. But then, there it was again. A rustling, faint but persistent, coming from the far side of the field, near where the brush dipped into a shallow grove. The pup cried again, louder this time, a sound with weight. Rahim turned his head slightly. The noise in the field stopped. Then, movement. Something low, something hesitant. Not a person, not a wild thing. The shape was familiar, though Rahim couldn't yet place it. It emerged slowly from the thicket, legs stiff, gait uneven. It paused often, sniffing the ground, raising its head to scent the air. The figure was lean, older. A dog! Rahim's breath caught not from surprise but from understanding. The animal moved with caution but not fear. It was searching, not wandering. Every few steps it stopped and looked ahead. Its coat was darker than the pup's, mottled with dirt. Bits of dried grass stuck to its fur. Its ribs pressed against its skin, and its tail hung low, not tucked, but tired. Inside, the puppy had pulled itself to standing. It took one step, then another, each footfall shaky. When Rahim stepped aside, the pup moved past him, walking toward the doorway, pausing at the threshold. It cried again, the sound rising and then fading into the stillness. The dog in the field lifted its head, ears perked. Its whole body seemed to pause. Then, slowly, it changed direction, no longer circling, no longer uncertain. It walked forward with purpose, closing the distance. The pup cried a third time, sharper now, more urgent. The dog broke into a slow trot. Limping, yes. Struggling, yes. But closing the space between them with increasing speed. Rahim stepped back, his eyes following the line that now stretched from the hearth to the edge of the field. A thread pulled tight by time, loss, and instinct. When the dog reached the edge of the yard, it didn't hesitate. It crossed the stones, nose low, eyes wide. The pup had collapsed to its belly just beyond the threshold, too weak to stand further, but its body quivered with anticipation. The older dog approached and lowered its head. For a long moment, it only breathed in the scent. Then, contact. Nose to fur, flank to the side. The pup didn't move, but its body went still. Its breathing slowed. The older dog curled around it, shoulder pressed against its spine, tongue moving in slow, deliberate strokes along its back. Rahim turned away then, letting the moment pass without intrusion. He stepped outside, leaving the door ajar. The air had cooled even more, and the smell of dry soil mixed with the last scent of sun-warmed wood. In the near distance, a crow called once, then fell silent. The village was settling into its evening rhythm, water being drawn, grain ground by hand, low murmurs passing between neighbors. But Rahim heard none of it now. His ears remained tuned to the soft sounds behind him. Inside, the two dogs remained close. The older one licked the pup's face with care, then nudged its flank as if urging it to drink. When the pup didn't move, the older dog lay beside it again, letting their warmth blend. Their bodies pressed close enough that their breathing began to match. By nightfall, the pup had managed to nurse, not much but enough to bring back a color to its gums and a little weight to its bones. The older dog cleaned every inch of its body afterward, curling tighter when the pup began to sleep again. There was no barking, no whining, only the smallest sounds of mouths and breath. Fur against fur, the slow weight of relief settling into place. Rahim returned with a bowl of rice soaked in broth and placed it near the hearth. The older dog didn't move toward it. She stayed where she was, her eyes half closed, her attention never fully straying. Rahim set the bowl down anyway and stepped back into the shadows. "It's okay, girl," he murmured, voice low, more breath than words. Later that night, Rahim watched the sky shift. A thin crescent moon hung above the trees. It cast no real light, only a hint of reflection off the leaves. But in the yard, the silence had changed. Not emptier, just fuller in a different way. In the dark, the two heartbeats pulsed quietly, no longer separate. The puppy had found its rhythm again, not through medicine or man, but through something more ancient, through nearness, through return. The days that followed moved like gentle pages in a book. Each one brought a little more strength. The pup began to rise on its own, walk farther, sleep less. Its cries grew sharper, sometimes insistent. It tried to chase the hens once, stumbling but joyful in its effort. The older dog watched closely but never interfered. She allowed the motion, the clumsy freedom, stepping in only when the pup overreached. By the fifth morning, the pup had begun to chew on twigs, pulling them with its teeth, growling softly at shadows. Its eyes were clearer, its tail twitched with curiosity, its body had filled out, no longer skeletal. The villagers, passing by on their way to the fields, paused and smiled without speaking. They understood what had happened, even if none of them had seen its beginning. A return like this didn't require explanation. And yet, something deeper stirred beneath the quiet recovery. Rahim began to notice it in the evenings, just after dusk. The older dog would rise and walk to the edge of the yard, sniffing the air. She would sit there, silent, watching the brush. Her posture was calm, but attentive, as if she were waiting. At first, Rahim thought she might be searching for a new resting spot or simply taking in the air. But she did it every night. Same place, same time, same focus. And each time, after a while, she would return, curl around the pup, and sleep. On the seventh night, Rahim stayed outside longer than usual. The sky was heavy with stars, the kind of night that pulls at the earth's breath. As he sat, the older dog rose again and went to her spot. And this time, Rahim saw what she'd been waiting for. From the trees, another dog appeared. Slow, hesitant, limps in one leg, ribs showing. It moved as though it had traveled far, cautious, uncertain, but driven by a single thread of scent, or memory, or hope. It paused when it saw the yard. Then it let out a low, broken bark. The older dog did not bark in return. She stood. Her ears twitched. Her body shifted forward, not alarmed, but ready. Inside the house, the pup stirred. Lifting its head, eyes alert. Then it let out a soft, whimpering cry, not in pain, but in recognition. The dog from the trees crossed the clearing slowly. The limp made its steps uneven, but it didn't stop. As it neared, the older dog walked to meet it. Their noses touched once, then again. Rahim stayed still. He understood. This was not a stranger. This was the other half of the search, and the echo the puppy had sent into the world, raw, weak, full of longing, had reached them both. Now it has come back. Continuing from the previous point, the evening gave way to a deeper calm. The kind that doesn't settle all at once but gathers gently across the land, seeping into the folds of earth and fur. The two adult dogs lay close, not asleep, but resting in the rhythm of each other's presence. The puppy, now nestled in the soft hollow between their legs, shifted in its dreams. Paws twitching lightly, a faint hum escaping its throat. It was the sound of safety, of warmth returned after absence. Around them, the field turned to silver under the light of a rising moon. Crickets began their slow chorus. Somewhere distant, an owl called once, then fell silent. These were the ordinary sounds of life continuing. Yet tonight they seemed quieter somehow, as if even the insects and birds knew something had returned to balance. Rahim remained seated outside, his arms resting across his knees, his body still. He did not speak. There was nothing that needed to be said. Sometimes presence was its own kind of offering, a willingness to witness without asking, without expecting. The story now belonged to the animals. His part had been small, necessary, and complete. The villagers came and went in pairs. No one stayed too long. One woman left a small dish of cooked lentils near the door. Another placed a scrap of old cloth by the steps, folded carefully. A boy set down half a mango, then walked away without turning back. They were gestures, quiet and full of regard. Not charity, just respect. Later that night, the older dog rose slowly, stretching each leg before moving to the edge of the yard. He sniffed along the border of the grasses, head turning left, then right, before lowering again. The limp in his step was more visible in the moonlight, but he walked with purpose, not as a wanderer, but as one who had returned to familiar land. The mother followed, guiding the puppy behind her. They moved as one shape through the short grass, their silhouettes long and low in the silver light. Occasionally, the pup stumbled. When it did, the mother paused, turned back, and waited. Not to carry, only to remain. Her pace was patient. The pup always caught up. At the edge of the clearing stood a copse of neem trees. Their branches swayed softly, leaves trembling with the weight of air. Beneath one of the largest trees, a shallow depression had formed in the dirt, perhaps once a resting place for livestock, now undisturbed and open. The older dog circled it once, then lay down. The mother settled beside him. The puppy tucked itself between them. From the house, Rahim watched as the grass stilled around them. His breath moved slowly, his eyes adjusting to the dark. He knew they would not stay forever. Dogs like these, those without names, without collars, they belong to the space between things. They pass through lives, not to be kept, but remembered. The next morning came with softness. No bells, no voices, just the light, peeling back the dark inch by inch. Dew clung to the tips of millet stalks. The dirt held the nights cool, but the warmth was returning beneath. Rahim walked quietly to the edge of the yard, hands empty. The three dogs still lay in the hollow, bodies close, eyes closed. As he stepped closer, the older dog lifted his head. His eyes met Rahim's, not in challenge, not in fear, just for a moment of shared stillness. Then he lowered his head again and exhaled, long and deep. Rahim crouched beside them, not touching, just near. He placed a bowl of water on the ground and stood. "You found each other," he said softly. A breeze moved through the trees behind him, lifting the edges of the grass, sending small seeds drifting across the clearing. The light caught them mid-air, scattering tiny shadows across the earth. By noon, the dogs had moved again, not far, but toward the hills that bordered the village edge. Rahim found their tracks in the dust, soft, shallow prints that showed hesitation at first, then direction. The pups were smallest, erratic, and light. The others pressed deeper, anchoring the trail. He didn't follow. He only watched the last place they had been, standing with one hand resting against the fig tree. In the stillness that followed, he thought of how little the world noticed these stories, how easy it was for such moments to slip past, unmarked. But for him, and maybe for the handful of villagers who had stood quietly by, the memory would remain. Not loud, not dramatic, just there, a shape in the grass, a cry from a well, a return through the trees. Weeks later, long after the tracks had faded and the clothes left behind had been folded away, Rahim would sometimes hear dogs at night, distant, moving along the riverbank, voices raised in short calls. They never came close, but they didn't feel far either, and always behind the house the old stone well stood in its shadow, dry, still, waiting for no one, but no longer empty.